Hey there, this is Miss Jessica, and I'm here to take you through sort of a fundamental part of our course. This is a presentation looking at what are called the principles of bioethics, which is really kind of the key tools that we'll be using in a lot of our analysis coming forward. You'll see that this presentation is also linked on the assignment page, so if you don't see something or I don't read it through, no problem. You can go back and reference it, but I just want to sort of guide you through what you're looking at and also help you see some potential pitfalls that we often see with students that are new to using these particular tools. So without further ado, okay. So here's some definitions of bioethics for you to read through. And basically, it has to do with this idea of the interface between medicine and ethics. There's also components of law, of course, in there. The law is, one would hope, ethical, but we kind of transcend the law, as you'll see when we talk about different types of questions. We're not just looking at what's allowed, but looking at what we should be doing on sort of a more fundamental level. So it talks about the impact bioethics has here. You can read through that, and I'm covering up part of it here, but it talks about the different disciplines that it goes into. So take a look and think through that. So bioethics is a discipline, meaning it has its own language. That's what a discipline sort of how we define it from an academic standpoint often. And one of the key language pieces we speak of are what are we called principles. So the principles are these fundamental concepts that we use as our grounding point for our analysis. So whenever we're making an argument, we refer to the bioethical principles. And I'm going to go through those in depth here. But I just want to I'm going to restate that. Whenever we're making an argument, we need to refer to the bioethical principles. That's what makes it your argument one that's coming from a bioethics stance, from our discipline-specific stance. So what are these principles? There's four. Respect for autonomy, non-maleficence, which is a long, big word, beneficence, and justice. And we're going to go through these. And essentially, you'll see that they kind of complement each other. They overlap in some ways, but you should really be thinking about every single one of these every time you make an argument. And we'll see how that plays out. So the first principle is autonomy. And again, I'm not going to read this for you. I'm just going to summarize it, and you can come back and read through these. So autonomy suggests that people are allowed to make decisions for themselves if they're rational and what we call competent, if they have the ability to understand what's going on around them. And that needs to be respected in a medical decision-making process situation. So if somebody says they want something, if somebody says they don't want something, they have the right to refuse care. If there's more than one option, the option ought to be given to the patient to consider, obviously, in counsel with their physician. But the idea is that individuals, patients, have the right to make decisions around their own health care. So there's an example here that we talk you through, and it's and again, you can read it, but it's talking about how, say you are diagnosed with cancer and a treatment option is chemotherapy. A rational person has the right to refuse care if they've looked at the benefits, they've looked at the negatives, and they've decided that they don't want to go through that. They have the right to do that. They can't be forced to any sort of care. Okay, non-maleficence. This is a long word. Non-maleficence has to do with the idea that any decision that's made, any treatments that's undergone should not be harming a patient, at the very least. So it's a principle of do no harm. So anything that a doctor or physician, course of action that they think about and recommend, they should be looking at that through the lens that at the very least, they shouldn't be harming someone. And of course, the question becomes, what is harm? And that's something that you'll see playing out in different units, particularly the unit that we're currently in, which is around right to die. But the idea is that's our sort of baseline fundamental. No matter what happens, you shouldn't be worse off after a medical procedure. This is coupled with and often sort of complements the principle of beneficence, which is that not only should medicine not do harm, but it also should do good. It should benefit the patient. So I always see non-maleficence as a floor, like at least it shouldn't do this. And in fact, it should be doing this. It should be benefiting the patient. So we make decisions because we think they're going to be doing something good for the patient. So that's sort of the other, that again, they complement each other, but they're quite different. And you can imagine some circumstances where they would play out differently. And again, I think I challenge you to think that through in this right to die case. This idea of doing no harm, and as a physician, how you would, depending on your belief system, how you may see those differently. Finally, the principle of justice. Justice is something that I think gets confusing for students. Often they think when we talk about justice, we're just talking about what's fair. And we are talking about fairness, but it's a specific type of fairness. It has to do with the allocation of resources. The idea that one individual or group of individuals shouldn't get more than another group of individuals, or it should be fair. So I shouldn't say you shouldn't get more, that it's fair. So obviously, I think we're pretty aware that the idea of fair can feel different for different reasons, and we have lots of ways of justifying this. But again, I want to be clear that it's about resources and how we decide who gets what, not the sort of vague idea of fair. Obviously, you can see some implications of this around access to care, but also around how we make decisions, triage decisions at the end of life, spending a certain amount of resources to keep somebody alive for 2 or 3 more days versus the good that could do in another area. That becomes the start. Those are some questions that are raised by justice. Last and not least, when you're applying these principles, you're going to be looking at a case and you're going to be considering how do they play out, right? And you really should try and focus on seeing how each and every principle plays out. Sometimes they won't come into play, like it's just not necessarily a factor. And sometimes they're going to be in conflict with each other. So you have to sort of do that balancing. So you have to think through like which one of these is most important and then create a reason why, right? Like, so maybe you see a real tension between autonomy and non-maleficence, and you have to decide, given the facts in this case and given what's going on here, I really think we should respect the patient's autonomy despite the idea that the doctor believes that they're going against the principle of non-maleficence, and then just make a justification for why that's the case, looking at the case. I hope that helps. Let's see, is that it? Oh, phew, that's a lot. It was a lot. Thank you. So we'll be practicing these, and again, you have this resource, and I hope that this was helpful.